all set and ready to go to present to you the topic Two to Tango, teaming in a virtual space. We present to you Mindy Lanie and Andrea Smith.
Hello, everybody. My name is Andrea Smith, and my colleague Mindy Lanie is joining me here today. To introduce who we are, my colleague Mindy uses she, her pronouns. She's a mixed heritage woman with tan skin, shoulder length curly brown hair, dark brown eyes, and she's wearing a blue dress with a black cardigan and a gray background. My name is Andrea Smith. I also use she, her pronouns, and I'm a light-skinned, white-presenting woman with long brown curly hair and dark brown eyes, wearing a black long-sleeve top with a blue studio background. I'm also going to do a land acknowledgement. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with this practice, in the United States, we like to acknowledge the lands that we are on. In particular, I'm speaking to you from the unceded ancestral lands of the Coast Salish and Puyallup people. These people are still here, continuing to honor and bring light to their ancient heritage. Mindy and I both had the pleasure of doing video remote interpreting before the pandemic ever began. I, in particular, got to do this in a number of different places around the world. And when the pandemic began, we were called upon by our colleagues to help share some of the lessons that we had learned up to that point in terms of studio setups, technical challenges, and some of the particulars of the individual platforms that we use. So here I share a picture of a sign that I wrote and I had tacked on my door at home. I'm sure anybody that shares a space, especially if you have small humans sharing your space with you, is familiar with needing everybody to stop streaming on their devices and to definitely not scream while you're trying to be on your open microphones. Mindy?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Mindy Lanie, and I will start with giving us a reframing of what we're talking about, because we've used the term VRI, video remote interpreting, for some time. However, what that looked like prior to COVID-19 and the pandemic and what that looks like now is very different. Before the pandemic, it was usually two people, the interlocutors, who were actually involved in whatever appointment or meeting was going on, located in the same space. While the interpreter, as you can see in the picture on the left, with the red circle around it, was on a screen, perhaps a computer or an iPad or a tablet of some sort, and not located with the people who were actually communicating with each other. Whereas now, as we all know, everyone is phoning in from their homes, from their bedrooms, from their offices, and it's leveled the playing field to a certain extent because now everyone is remote. Next slide. And we'd like to take a couple of moments to go through some common mistakes, because these do impact our ability to team with each other and our clients' ability to actually see us clearly. So in the picture on the left, you can see some the same person, but they've changed the tone of their lighting. So they've gone from cool lighting on the top, more blue tone, to warm lighting on the bottom, more orange tone. And the top one is obviously a clearer picture. The picture on the right is what happens when you don't have enough light. Your camera really struggles to pick you up, and you can see the picture is kind of pixelated. It's just not as clear. Next slide. In this slide, we can see two pictures. On the bottom left, the person has no backdrop, and so it's visually noisy. which of course makes it difficult for us to team, but it also makes it difficult for our clients to see us. On the top, you also see there's no backdrop. And this picture, the person was actually not in a private room, and so there were children running back and forth while they were interpreting. Next slide. In this picture, we see that people have tried to have backdrops, but again, it's visually distracting for everyone because they haven't ironed and they haven't made sure to not have wrinkles. So please, if you're going to have this type of backdrop, make sure it's ironed. Next slide. In this picture, again, visually noisy, on the upper left-hand side, we see that the backdrop doesn't actually fill the frame of the camera, which is going to be important so that everyone can clearly see the interpreter without distraction. And on the bottom left, again, we have a contrast issue, but also it's not as clear here, but what isn't as clear is that in the live viewing, you could see the draping of the blanket or sheet. It hadn't been ironed, and again was visually distracting. Next slide. And I think in this one, we can see that even at the highest levels, we still experience these problems. So on the picture in the upper picture, the interpreter actually had control of the studio. And so they were able to select a good background, have good contrast, have good lighting. On the bottom picture, the interpreter unfortunately didn't have any studio control. And so it ended up being that the background that was selected was the same color as their suit, that the lighting was not as good. And so the interpreter wasn't as clear. So even, in our homes, all the way up to the highest levels of our governments, we're seeing these issues pop up. And I believe the next slide is Andrea. No, yes, nope, wrong way. Yep, I will hand it over.
So now you've seen some examples of some of the mistakes and problems that happen. I'm sure you have all experienced this at one point or another. So I'd like to show you some examples of some good setups and point out in particular different features. And one of the key takeaways here is that there is no one right way to do this. You'll see a lot of different samples and you will see how it looks. So for example, here, my colleague Byron Kinson from Georgia in the USA, he has this studio setup that you can see on the right that features a large green backdrop. He avoids his wrinkles by having the professional backdrop hanger that allows the fabric to stretch properly. He uses a professional lighting system, and Byron in particular he's a deaf interpreter and he does a lot of video products. So the professional lighting is very important for him. And he has a standing desk, which allows him a little bit more mobility in the work that he's able to perform and makes it easier for him to adjust the framing for when he needs to be center frame or when he needs to be offset to allow for, the presentation of a PowerPoint or something to be embedded in the video. And this is my colleague Melchior Fernandez, also from the USA. And the features that you can see here that are interesting are that he uses a unique background color. Not everybody has to use the blue or the green that we see so commonly. He has a low back arm chair with no arms on it and uses a small computer riser underneath his laptop, which allows the camera to come up to eye level and be direct with the interpreter's gaze rather than looking down at the interpreter or looking up at the interpreter in some way. I see quite a lot of interpreters coming across where the camera's not angled properly. He also uses 2 ring lighting sources to help reduce shadows and improve overall appearance. This is my colleague Felixs from the USA. Couple of different features about her setup. She uses a unique color. This is like a studio portrait background. You see a lot of interpreters have these in various colors as well. In her setup, she has dual monitors. Both of them are on risers and can be moved up and down. and she has quite a large ring light that she uses on hers. This is an example of my setup as it currently is. Mine has gone through many incarnations over the years, everything from literally working in the laundry closet to having a little more space to run around. I use a standard colored background of blue, and I have an ergonomic chair that you see there for low back pain, which I unfortunately have, and it allows me to sit on my knees most of the day instead of sitting in a standard chair as I'm doing now. I also have a computer riser. I have a single ring light, but I also have a window directly in front of me and an overhead light. I normally, when I'm working, have much more light on me than I do right now, but I am in Seattle and it is 5 o'clock in the morning. So I don't quite have the sun to help me out yet. I also have 2 sets of headphones. I work a lot in the VRI environment, upwards of 8 hours or more a day. And so the batteries die, and I want to make sure I always have extra backups for the headsets. So I'm currently using AirPods, and I also have headsets that I can plug in when my AirPods have told me that I'm working too many hours. I also have multiple devices available. I have my phone, I have a desktop, and 2 laptops that I'm using because I am running lots of different things at the same time, and we'll talk a little more about why. So one more for Mindy. This is Mindy's setup, and she uses a standard neutral color background. So you see grays that are out there as well. She has an external monitor to her laptop. So it's not a second desktop computer, but it's another monitor that she can use. And this monitor in particular is able to slide up and down. So that allows for her to go from sitting to standing. Like me, she works a lot of hours, so it's nice to be able to change positions. She has the second device available on the right side that you see for teaming purposes, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. She also uses a professional lighting device, and she has a large purple exercise ball that she likes to sit on for her seating choice. And she uses a footrest as well to make sure she has proper ergonomics. I think as interpreters, we are sitting more than we ever used to. So making sure that you pay attention to your ergonomics and making sure that you have the ability to change from sitting to standing is really important to help keep your body fit. Mindy?
So now we're going to take a look at the actual teaming now that we have a visual concept of what a good setup looks like to help everyone be able to engage and access us. So now we're going to look at what open processing means and how we can utilize various teaming strategies, which came up during the keynote this morning. So open processing, interpreting is a team sport. It's typically one or more people supporting each other to ensure that the message is clear. And it's not like The Wizard of Oz. I hope that most of you have seen the movie where, sorry, spoilers, at the end we find out that all of the magic that's been happening has been one man hidden behind a curtain. And interpreting can seem that way, but really it's more of a team sport. Next slide. So it's a continuum as well. Actual open processing would look like being on Zoom like we are now, with both interpreters on screen with their cameras on and their microphones on, and providing support in a way that everyone who is on the meeting or on the call can see exactly what's happening. As the name suggests, it is an open process that everyone can see. In this particular slide, the process is a little less open for everyone attending the meeting, but it's open for the interpreters. So on the external monitor, I had the actual presentation that was, the actual meeting. On the right-hand side, I had a Google Doc that everyone on my team had access to. So we could add text support, text teaming. So names were spelled out clearly. Any sort of signs that were confusing were clarified. And as you can see, you might not be able to see it actually on this slide, but the font is really big. I had it over 60-point font. And I have a very bright color, that bright blue, so that anytime someone started typing, my eye would be drawn to it and I would catch whatever the feed was. With a Google Doc, you also have the ability to change the colors. So another person might want to choose a bright green, again, something that will draw my eye, but then I know who it is who's typing. On the bottom, you can see that's my laptop screen, and we've set up a separate room. This one, I believe, was a whereby room. So my laptop also has a camera, but I have an external camera that I'm using right now. So I use my laptop camera for my teaming room, and we're able to also provide sign support in that way. So I've got text teaming and sign teaming. And if I wanted to put in a headset, I could also receive that via audio. Next slide. This is even slightly less open processing. In this slide, you can see that I actually have an adjustable external device that will hold on to my phone. So in this one, my team is on a WhatsApp video call with me, and I've got audio to that in one ear, while on my computer, I had the audio from the actual presentation. So you can see I've got the discussion open, I've got the chat box open so that I can monitor that if there are any issues. And I've got the participant list open so that I can quickly see the names and feed my team if needed. And I can do that either via audio or I can do that via sign language. Next slide.
We have a question in the chat.
Fabulous.
Are virtual backgrounds used as well, or is there a reason for only physical backdrops as a background choice? And this comes from our colleague, Marcin Miefling.
Andrea, do you want to field that one?
Sure. Generally speaking, it's advised to only use the physical studio backgrounds that you see here being used by all of our colleagues. The virtual backgrounds, unfortunately, struggle because it's causing differences in the camera focuses. So especially when you're using sign language, the hands can disappear into the blurred backgrounds quite easily. And virtual backgrounds can get you into some trouble. I don't know if you all saw the meme, but in the US, a very popular joke went around of an attorney appearing in a court appearance on a Zoom meeting who had inadvertently left a cat filter on his face and had to tell the judge that indeed he was not a cat. So we want to be careful about virtual filters. They can lead to some embarrassing moments.
Indeed. Excellent question. Right. So in this picture, what we see is I actually don't have an assigned interpreting team in this picture, but you can see that I have on the left-hand side, I have a Word document. Let me back up. For this particular job, I got a script ahead of time. And we also did dry runs. So we did rehearsals beforehand. So I was able to go through the script that I received. I put it into Word format. I went through and I put any names bold. I highlighted them in, I highlighted in different colors so that I could easily track where I was on this on the page. And I did that all before the job actually happened because I know the things that I'm going to need to remember. I'm not going to remember the spelling of everyone's name, so I highlight that. On the upper right-hand side, highlighted in pink, you can see that I actually have a live Google Doc, and that was being controlled by the people running the program. They took live questions from Twitter and from Facebook and from YouTube, and they copied and pasted those questions into the live document. So I was able to easily scroll, because as you can see on the very left-hand side, that's my laptop. Go back one, Andrea. On the very left-hand side is my laptop. So I was able to reach over and scroll up as I was going so that I could spell the screen names and the Twitter handles appropriately. And then underneath that, it's the live feed of the show so that I could remember which way I was pointing and so that I could see which hearing person was speaking and reference them appropriately. Next slide. Hand off to Andrea.
So we wanted to take a moment to talk about some of the different platforms that we may be using. This is by no means comprehensive. There are many video platforms out there. And we wanted to talk about some of the features and problems that you'll see across these platforms. So as a quick reference that you can come back to on the slides after the presentation, there are a few different features that we use in particular. Customizable video display, meaning the ability to resize the boxes that you're looking at, to move them around in different orders, to select only a few that you would like to look at. And unfortunately, not all video programs are created equal in this regard. Captions is also an important feature for us, not just as an accessibility feature for the deaf community, but also for ourselves as interpreters. I know in my daily job, I work all day, every day with the captions running automatically, in part to help myself. If I miss something, I've got an immediate team there because not all of my individual assignments have teams, but also to give the deaf person a bit more autonomy because they are able to see how I am voice interpreting for them in a way that they're not normally able to do out in the real world. And it provides a lovely opportunity for them to offer corrections to what I am saying, and to make sure that their message is more clear. It can be intimidating for some to see those words popping up and knowing that your client is perhaps micromanaging every little thing you say, but it actually fosters a lot of trust between you and the client as they can see the quality of your output quite easily. Screen sharing is also a feature that is used a lot and is particularly problematic. Screen sharing often breaks the sessions, as I'm sure you've all encountered, in particular when people want to show video or things that have video and audio attached to them. And not all the services are created equal with this either. And also another note, slightly technical in nature, the different platforms look at the data content of the video in different ways. And some platforms prefer to prioritize the frames over the pixelization or the clarity of the picture. And so what that means is that if they prefer the frame rate, what you will see is an uninterrupted stream, but perhaps it gets blurry at times. Whereas other platforms, and most of them do this, will prioritize clarity over frame rate. And so if the stream is struggling, it will drop frames. So this is for us particularly important because it is cutting out frames of sign language and can make things very difficult to see. WebEx in particular prioritizes frames over clarity and is the most likely to just pause for a minute and then pick back up again. But we have missed a whole sentence or two in the meantime while we wait. Google Meets is another particularly difficult one, also called MS Teams. These two different products, both of them are very difficult to customize and the accessibility features are difficult. with the people that I work with, generally speaking, when we are invited to meetings that are on MS Teams or Google Meet, we ask to use a different platform because they do not work very well at all. And I see a question in the chat from South Africa. And the question is, I would like to know the green background, can it be green material cloth or must be a specific material? Also, how to avoid the shadow background. Is it because too much lights or too little? That's a great question. Thank you for asking that. The material itself doesn't really matter. I've seen people use cloth or linen. It doesn't have to be a professional background. I've seen people use their table coverings or their bed sheets for their backgrounds. As long as it is ironed and it's hung in such a way as to not be wrinkly, it would be fine to use any of those things. Of course, the importance is the color of the background, and that color can vary, as you saw in the presentation, among a lot of options, and you can play with it and find out what works best for your skin tone, the lighting that you have available and whatnot. For the light itself, the shadows, generally speaking, happen when people do a single point or only 2 points of light, because the lighting will shadow down behind you. So if the lighting is off to one side, it will create a shadow cast going in the other direction. And I will see this sometimes for interpreters who set up in front of their windows and work a long assignment. You can watch the shadow moving across their background as the sun moves across the sky in front of them. Mindy, did you have a comment?
I see another question in the chat. I am Martin from Ghana. As an interpreter for a deaf-blind person, how do I incorporate these platforms when interpreting for my deaf-blind client?
So this is also a good question about using these platforms for deaf-blind clients. I have one deaf-blind client that I have worked with who uses the, it's called JAWS, and it's a piece of software that magnifies the screen and allows them to move around on the screen. They also use a much larger monitor, and they have told me that that is one of the advantages to this new world, is that they are able to make their regular life-size interpreter bigger, so it's easier for them to see, and that they can also use a Braille refresher that goes to their chat function. So sometimes I can type something in the chat and it comes up on their Braille refresher as well. I don't have experience with a tactile client in this environment personally. And I'm not sure that Mindy does either. Is that right, Mindy? Yeah.
I do not know.
So I'm afraid I don't have more suggestions beyond that, but I do know that there are a number of other software strategies that deafblind people can use to get the information from their screen. Here in the US, of course, we had some pretty strong restrictions on where we could go and who we could be with. And so a lot of deafblind people were stuck without communication for a long time, and it took a while to figure out how to reconnect with those people.
We do have another question from Angelica. She says, all of these tips you are giving are really useful to me. The other difficult part is to work together with a partner. The switching, the teamwork is really difficult in this virtual life. Now, I'd like to take a second and speak to that. Both Andrea and I work with a number of different people on a daily basis. And one of the strategies that we've used is to, as you saw in some of the slides that I presented, having a separate, either separate device, or like I use my laptop camera to have a separate interpreting room. I sign in early to that, so I have 15, 20 minutes to a half hour with my team before we actually start, so that we're able to talk about, whether or not we'd like to switch at 15 minutes, if we'd like to switch at 20 minutes, how they want their feed. Do they want it in text on a Google Doc, or would they prefer to receive it via sign language in our shared room? It is absolutely a challenge, without a doubt. But I think that having a separate interpreting room allows you to have that connection in a way that we don't typically have in a virtual space, but that we were all very used to having when we were interpreting in the same physical space. So I think that setting up a separate whereby room, or setting up FaceTime or a WhatsApp call can help alleviate those problems.
I agree with all of that, absolutely. In terms of the real-time teaming, I do spend a significant number of hours of the day doing real-time teaming. And we did call the presentation 2 to Tango just for the fun of the words. But really, I often work with 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 interpreters at the same time. And one of the challenges there is not having too many feeds happening at the same time. So we have to be really clear about who is meant to support who, and everybody else just needs to be quiet. And that can be a real challenge. Also, a lot of the situations that I work in, I'm primarily a legal interpreter. So open processing is less available to us as an option because we can't perform that in front of the court record. It has to be something that is performed in a space that is private, and that could be a different set of challenges as well. But as Mindy mentioned, using multiple devices is really the key to unlocking that. It allows you access to your teams without having to perform the open process or the interpreting in front of others. I also noticed that Paul Michaels in the chat, thank you, Paul, shared some links to different equipment that he has purchased for his studio setup. I debated whether to include links in the presentation and opted not to, since not everybody has access to the same Amazon features, and I was hoping people would share where they found their equipment that they like. And before I take any more questions, I'm going to finish the next slide, and then we'll answer some more questions there. So a few pitfalls that I wanted to draw your attention to that are important. So these are particular things about different platforms that we can find very challenging. The maximum number of participants in an environment is a problem. I know I've had it happen more than once where I go to join an assignment and the event has maxed out and I can't get in the room, and the deaf person is there, but there is no interpreter available. I find a good solution for this is to always make sure that you have not just the contact information for the deaf individual, but a way to get them on a different video platform if you need to. So that if something goes wrong in the main room, you can quickly call them on FaceTime or a messenger service or WhatsApp and get them on screen, so that if all else fails, you can work through that. I've done that a number of times where my deaf person was in the room and I had them turn on their audio, and then I could listen to the event through their screen and interpret back to them through that channel. So that's an option. Zoom has a particular problem. I call it the ghost host problem, where a Zoom meeting can be opened and begun, and there is nobody in the room that has a host privilege. So we're all there, we're all looking at each other, but nobody can turn on captions. Nobody can create break rooms. Nobody can spotlight or offer people the multi-pin capability, and it creates a lot of problems there. Mindy?
Peggy has just put in the chat that another of the pitfalls with Zoom is that it doesn't record all breakaway rooms, only the one where the host or the spotlight speaker is. And you also cannot get the captioning in the breakout rooms.
Yes, I was just about to say that actually, that the other problem with Zoom is that a lot of the features that we use for accessibility do not follow into the breakout rooms. So a strategy there for all of your sake is to ask the event providers to use the main room as a breakout room and to keep the deaf client, the interpreting team, and additional participants there to do whatever discussions are meant to be done. And that way the accommodation features will continue. Another problem with all the platforms is auto tracking cameras. I encounter this problem a lot because I'm in the legal realm, and a lot of the prisons and jails in the US use cameras that do an auto tracking function for movement. And so when a deaf person is signing, the camera is constantly focusing, refocusing, and reframing the picture. So all of a sudden, I'm only looking at their nose, and then I'm looking at them as though they're at the end of a long tunnel, and it goes back and forth, and it can be very, very frustrating. And of course, because it's in the carceral system, they don't have the ability to do anything about it, to touch the camera, to change the settings. So that's something to be aware of, that auto tracking cameras can be a real challenge. WebEx and Teams, as I mentioned, are both very difficult. WebEx in particular is really counterintuitive. If you want to lock a participant in a certain spot, you can't just drag and drop the frame. You have to go into a menu list and choose the name of who you want in that particular tile. And it can be very time consuming and frustrating. Zoom also doesn't allow you to use the same device camera for a second platform. So for example, I have Zoom on my laptop right now. I would not also be able to run, say, FaceTime or Skype session or something like that on this same device. I have to have a second device to do that. Zoom also doesn't allow you to host more than one meeting at a time. You can only host one meeting. And you can set up one meeting for hosting and one meeting for participating, but they can't be on the same device. And an important one for all of us to remember, the Zoom chats are not private. I have seen interpreters making comments in the chats about the presenters or the content and all of that. And it is not a private thing, because when you close Zoom, the host is able to see the contents of the chat, even the private peer-to-peer messaging chats after the fact. So do be cautious and aware of that. And importantly, make sure you have your team's contact information so that you can team through texting or through some other platform. Like Mindy, I also really like the Google Docs function because it allows more substantive sharing of information. You can throw in pictures, you can very quickly add stuff, and it gives you nice, bright, big visual alerts, which I very much like. All right, let's take a few more questions here. So I have a question from Mindy. I think, did you track what's the first question we need to answer?
Yes, let's see here. Yeah. This question comes from, and I apologize if I mispronounce your name, Gianni Phineas from Ghana says, Mindy and Andrea, what prerequisite skills did you have that have come in handy with VRI work for interpreting? Which pre-skills would you recommend before developing the confidence and expertise for this? I personally had worked in the United States. We have video remote interpreting and we have video relay service, which are people who are in different areas. A hearing person who doesn't have access to video, a deaf person who doesn't have access to audio, calling into a call center. So I had worked in the VRS setting for a number of years before I moved and started working in VRI. And part of it is just time in the chair and figuring out how to navigate adjusting the screen when somebody screen shares, spotlighting the deaf person or pinning people. Part of it is just getting the muscle memory. So part of it is just having actual experience doing that. And I think that working with more experienced interpreters can be very helpful with that. Andrea, did you want to add?
I agree with all of that. I think another prerequisite skill, or at least thoughts that you should be thinking of, is that the languages that we're all using look different in 2D than they do in 3D. So, for example, there are certain things like the letter C in American Sign Language that I always turn to the side because it's much easier to see it visually than it is when it comes this direction. And there are some other small nuances like that that I make changes for in American Sign Language so that it's easier for my client to see that I wouldn't do in real life. So that's another thing that you can think of. I think we're getting close to time, so we'll kind of do a lightning round and try to answer some of these as quickly as possible. Kung Hee Ko?
Before we get to that, several people have asked for us to share our presentation in the chat. So I just want to acknowledge that that request is being made, and Andrea is the owner of the actual presentation. So I'm going to defer to her to do that.
As soon as we have one more slide, and as soon as that has been shown, I can turn off the slideshow and I can share the PDF version of the presentation. So we will do that. So we do have a question about why interpreters are changing to the gray backgrounds, and is it because the green and blue color make the eyes feel tired? As I mentioned before, the color of your background is something that has a lot of factors that go into that. Your own skin tone and lighting is going to be an important feature of which colors you choose to use. Not all colors look equally good on everybody. For example, when I am very pale in color, and when I use the color that Mindy has in her background, I fade right into it. So it's not a good choice for me. Let's see.
I think that might be all of the questions. There was a question about whether or not Wasley has met with Zoom. That's not one that we can answer.
Yes. I could say that in the US, there is an interpreter that has a good connection with somebody in the accessibility department of Zoom. And he frequently comes to social media spaces and says, what do you have? What should I tell Zoom? And he carries that back to Zoom. For example, the fact that Zoom offers auto captioning was a part of advocacy that we were all doing, because originally the captioning was behind the paywall. You had to upgrade to the paid service in order to get the auto captioning. And we made the case that accessibility should not be behind a paywall. And Zoom agreed, and now it's available on the free platforms. Marcin is asking whether the limitations of using more than one platform at a time is a hardware issue, because they've been able to use both MS Teams and Zoom on the same screen laptop at the same time and get input from the meeting on Teams and interpreting to Zoom. So it's a hardware and software control. Frequently the devices, like I could open a second platform, but I wouldn't be able to use my camera in the second platform. So that can be a
one
real
example. In one of the jobs that I previously did, they used Google Meets for all of their business meetings. I was able to use Google Meets and Whereby and have both access my external camera without an issue. With Zoom, I can have a second platform open, but Zoom blocks me from having the second platform use my external camera.
And that is a really good segue to our last slide, which is a small takeaway advocacy pitch for all of you who are watching this. It is rather ridiculous that a person who has a video phone, and that may be the only technology available to them, or a cell phone, and that may be the only technology that they have, we can't call each other across platforms. So I can't dial into a Zoom meeting from a Skype account. I can't call a FaceTime user with a video phone. And that is a proprietary choice made by companies that can be changed, and it should be changed. There's a good deal of advocacy happening on that front here in the United States, but if we can get some worldwide work on that, I think it would make a lot of people's lives a lot easier, and it would help broaden the accessibility for the deaf community. I have a question from Chico, who is asking if it's appropriate for interpreters to request that the organizer of the meeting change platforms. I've never done that even when I wanted to. How do you explain why interpreters are asking for the change? That's a very good question. And I will note that there may be some cultural considerations involved in such a request. In my case, I'm not usually the one making the request. It's the deaf clients who are making that request to change the platform. And we explain it by saying that it's not an accessible function. And we've done this even with our own government, because the Zoom government accounts do not include captioning. And so when we have meetings with the government, we often ask them if we can use our own Zoom accounts in order to make those meetings happen. And they will generally comply, because it is a violation of ethics otherwise. And we are at time, so I'm afraid we do need to stop. But I thank you all so much for your time and your attention here today. Mindy?
Again, yes, thank you so much for your time and attention. Thank you to the organizers and to our interpreting team. We know that there were some technical words, and we appreciate that that was not an easy interpreting task. So much appreciation to all of you. And I have included my email in the chat. So please do feel free to reach out. I'm happy to discuss any additional questions that come to mind at any point. Happy to connect with interpreters and folks.
I have dropped the PDF for the presentation into the chat as well. It is currently uploading. Please feel free to download it at your convenience.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrea and Mindy. That's really helpful. I mean, you've made my life as a moderator super easy for this session. And you have made it like a two to tango, not just in the real life teaming, but in your real life presentation, how you interact with all the audience. It's really wonderful. So I would like to ask our audience to join me to thank Andrea Smith and Mindy Lanie for their wonderful presentations. It's really lots of useful learning, especially from how they shared from all the experiences and the technical tips. I'm sure many of us, all of us here, have benefited tremendously from this session of yours. Thank you so much. And we have got about let me see. We have got about 7 minutes before the closing remarks. So we can see in the chat box, we will have the link to go back to the main session, the plenary, whereby we will have the WASDI president, Dr. Christopher Stone, who will be delivering the closing remark. So we have got maybe about 7 minutes now to take a break and then move to the main room, and we will have the closing remarks. Thank you so much. And thank you once again, Andrea Smith and Mindy Lanie. Thank you. So I'll see you back at the main room. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.